We are continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Siman Kuf Lametet, in the halachot of Kriyat Sefer Torah. And we are starting Seif Zayin. This is on Chaf Bet Amud Bet of the regular prints of Mishna Berura. Maran writes, Achar she'anu ha'am, Baruch Hashem ha'mevorach l'olam va'ed. Again, we started that the Ole, a person that gets the Aliyah to the Sefer Torah, starts with Baruchu et Hashem HaMevorach before he says his bracha, and people answer Baruch Hashem HaMevorach L'Olam Va'ed, and then he has to say that as well himself. Achar she'anu ha'am Baruch Hashem HaMevorach L'Olam Va'ed. When the people in the Bet Knesset answered that, Chozer HaMevarech ve'omer Baruch Hashem HaMevorach L'Olam Va'ed. He also says that that he should not just be a person that tells other people to bless HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name, but he himself is included in them as well. And Maran writes in the next saif, this, by the way, it's a common mistake that some people say Baruch Hu et Hashem HaMevorach and they don't end up saying Baruch Hashem HaMevorach L'Olam Va'ed themselves. So it's something to be mindful and careful, something for the Chazan to be watchful as well. Maran writes in Seif Chet, Afilu berach birkot HaTorah le'atzmo. If the person himself has said birkot HaTorah already in the morning, v'techef kra'u birkot HaTorah, and right away, immediately, they call him to the Torah, and he was late for Shacharit, for instance, or he was early for the next minyan, and he just has said birkat HaTorah, and now they call him up there, he still has to say, Sarich lachzor ulvarech asher b'harbanu. He has to go back and say asher b'harbanu again when he reads the Torah, because again, that is the institution of Chazal, the takana, that we make the bracha at the beginning and at the end of every aliyah. Hence, he could say it, no problem. Again, the same question with the Kohen, when there's no Levi in the house, and he says two brachot back to back, still would be the same. That he's allowed to do that, even though that he said the bracha is not considered bracha she'enat tzricha, is not considered an unnecessary bracha, due to the fact that this is takanat Chazal. The mishum kivod HaTorah nitkenak shkore b'tzibur. This is not a technical birkat HaTorah that you need to say in order to learn. That rather, this is part of the takanat Chazal for kavod HaTorah, that you should respect the Torah by saying a bracha before and after it. Not much similarity between this and the fact that a person cannot learn without saying Birkat HaTorah. Now, if it would be the other way around, if you come to shul, you have not said Birkat HaTorah, and now you say this bracha, you were yotza, of course, with a Birkat HaTorah, you don't necessarily need to go back and say the bracha again. Says the Mishnah Berura, Shlo amar shum pasuk achar kach. You have not, even if you haven't said any psukim after saying Birkat HaTorah, you were saying, you're minding your business, saying your Birkat HaTorah, and immediately after you finish Birkat HaTorah, before you even said a pasuk, they called you up to the Torah, you still, even though that you had no hefsek whatsoever, you still say the brachot again, because again, this was instituted for kavod HaTorah. This is not considered an extra bracha, an unnecessary bracha, and you could say it with no concerns. Says the Mishnah Berura, ומכל מקום כדי שלא יהיה ברכה ראשונה בחדי, כתב הפרי חדש בשערי האחרונים, ויראה לקרוא על כל פנים פסוק אחד. Best would be, says the Pri Chadash, that on the way going up to the Torah, if you have said no psukim after your Birkat Torah, you should say some psukim. Say, Hashem Yishmerecha, Yer Hashem Paravelecha, or Vaydaber Hashem El Aaron. The psukim that usually are said after Birkat Torah, you could say, in order to avoid the bracha being said on nothing. So this way, the first bracha that you said was in order to learn those psukim that you're saying right now on your way up to the Torah, and then the bracha that you say on the Torah would be for kavod HaTorah. That's what the Berich Hadash says, and that's the psak of the Mishna Berura, the Chafetz Chaim as well. Next Saif in Shulchan Aruch, Im Kra'u likrot b'Torah kodem sheyivarech birkat Torah la'atzmo. What happens if you have not said birkat Torah yet? You just woke up, came to shul in order to say your brachot, and before you said birkat Torah, they called you up already. So this is your first time today that you're saying birkat Torah. Says the Shulchan Aruch, in that case, kevar niftar milevarech birkat asher bachar banu. Then you don't necessarily need to say the bracha asher bachar banu after you get your aliyah, because again you said it on the Torah is nothing less than someone that said avad olam in birkot kriyat shema, which patters him from saying birkat Torah afterwards. In other words, a person, we know this halacha, that a person that forgot to say birkat Torah and after he said Shema, he remembers, I haven't said Birkat Torah. He doesn't go back to say Birkat Torah any longer, because when he said Avat Olam, that bracha covers the content of Birkot Torah, and hence he fulfilled his obligation of saying Birkat Torah with that, and he doesn't have to go back and say it again. דלא ממי שנפטר, וכמבואר לאל בסימן מ"ז, וכתבו האחרונים, מכל מקום לא דמי לגמרי לנפטר בעבר הבא, תעתם יצא בזה גם ברכת אשר קידשנו במצוותיו, לעסוק בדברי תורה. Over there, when you said ברכת קריאת שמע, אהבת עולם, that covers all of your 3 ברכות התורה. Over here, you said a very specific ברכה, אשר בחר בנו. Yeah, well, you have to say 2 others, right? You still have to say Asher kideshanu v'tzivanu al divrei Torah, or for Ashkenazim la'asok b'divrei Torah, right? V'ha'arevna, you have to say that. You just don't say the last bracha Asher b'char banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu, that you don't say. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Seif Yud, bracha acharona Asher natan lanu Torat emet, zu Torah shebiktav, v'chayei olam nata betochenu, zu Torah shebal peh. Very interesting thing coming as a seif in Shulchan Aruch, which is only a perush on the last bracha that we say after reading the Torah. Asher natan lanu et Torato, v'chayei olam nata betochenu. And says the Shulchan Aruch, Asher natan lanu et Torato, this is Torah shebiktav, the written Torah. But you know what it means? Chayei olam nata betochenu, that he has implanted in us eternal life. You know what's eternal life? Torah shebal peh. When you're involved with reading Shulchan Aruch, learning Torah shebal peh, Gemara, Mishnayot, down to halacha, that's life. When you're involved with Torah shebal peh, it becomes part of you. That's Chayei olam nata betochenu, as Maran writes it, and our minhag is to say v'chayei olam. Says the Mishnah Berura. Well, the Shulchan Aruch says v'chayei ha'olam nata b'tochenu, and the minhag of both Sfaradim and Ashkenazim nowadays is to say chayei olam, not chayei ha'olam nata b'tochenu, and same is in Kaf HaChaim as well. But the beginning of the bracha, the Pri Chadash writes that the best language in the beginning of the bracha is Asher natan lanu Torato, Torat emet. Like we say, like the Edot HaMizrach say, Asher natan lanu Torato, Torat emet. And Rabbi Tzchak Palagi in Yafei Lalev, the son of Rabbi Chaim Palagi, he says you have to say et as well. Asher natan lanu et Torato, Torat emet. Right? So which is again the way Edot HaMizrach have the minhag nowadays. Asher natan lanu et Torato, Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. And the Ben Ish Chai writes that when you say the bracha, you should have this kavanah in mind. Why does the Shulchan Aruch have to say this? Well, Shulchan Aruch is not a perush tefillah sefer. So the Ben Ish Chai is telling you, this is what you have to have in mind. When you say the bracha, you have to understand perush hamilot. What does it mean? Asher natan lanu Torah shebachtav, chayei olam nata b'tochenu, Torah shebal peh. You have to have this in mind when you go up to the Torah. Fine. Says Maran of Shulchan Aruch, last saif over here, Hakore b'Torah sarich le'echoz b'sefer Torah b'shat bracha. You can't just stand there and say the bracha. You have to hold the sefer Torah when you say the bracha. V'samchu minhag zeh, says the Ramah, the poskim attached this minhag to the pasuk in Yehoshua when it says lo yamish sefer HaTorah hazeh mipicha chazak ve'emas, that you should be strong and firm. ומזה נהגו לומר למסיים לקרוא בתורה לכל פעם חזק וברוך. When this minhag, they say chazak, Ashkenazim say chazak, chazak, when chazak at the end. But really the Ramah writes, every oled that gets an aliyah, you say chazak to him. So as far as have this, chazak u'baruch. Right? And it says baruch tihyeh. So that comes from this attachment to the pasuk in Yehoshua of chazak ve'emas. Because it says, lo yamish sefer HaTorah hazeh mipicha. When you are learning the Torah, chazak. Chazak means to be strong. It also means to hold. Right? So therefore the minhag is to hold the Sefer Torah, to be connected with the Sefer Torah physically when you say the bracha.
So
now,
just touch it, or you actually like?
Yeah, touch it. Now we'll see the Ben Ish Chai says that he actually should be touching the parchment with a talit. You can't touch the actual parchment of Sefer Torah, of course. But at the first, before that, the Mishna Berura says, Hainu di'echos be'amudeh al-Sefer Torah. The Ashkenazim who don't have a box, but they have the poles, the wooden poles of Sefer Torah. You hold the amudim. You don't have to hold the actual Sefer Torah. Again, as we mentioned, the Ben Ish Chai and Kaf HaChaim, they both write, and this is based on the writings of Arya Kadosh and Marchu, that when you say the bracha, you should actually be touching, of course, with a separation of maybe a cloth, should be touching the yiri'ah, the actual parchment of the Sefer Torah, and not just the box of the Sefer Torah or the poles of the Sefer Torah. And the Ben Ish Chai and Kaf HaChaim, they add that not only in the time of the bracha you should be doing that, but during the course of the entire reading, you should keep your hand on the parchment, again, with, of course, a separation of a cloth or your talit, or the cloth that there is miyuchad for saying the bracha and the Torah, and you do that, and he says, I believe, even with both of your hands, which is a little bit impractical, given the fact that the Baal Koreh is standing next to you, but at least your right hand is holding the right side. When you say the bracha, you want to have both hands on. Then your right hand would be on the right side of the scroll that is rolled up, and your left hand is going to be on the left scroll on the other side as well. Now, when you're holding the Sefer Torah, a person cannot let gas. When you're connected with something of davar shebikdusha, a person that has tefillin on, Chas Shalom, he cannot let gas. Can be mefiach. So says the Ben Ish Chai. Well, this is in Shelot Utshuvot Torah Lishma. Generally speaking, assume it's Ben Ish Chai. He writes that a person cannot be mefiach when he is holding on to a Sefer Torah, just like when you have tefillin on, you can't do it either. Now this becomes a little bit complicated because tefillin is a big machloket. According to Rashi and maybe Rav Sadia Gaon, I don't remember this exactly, I'm just saying based on memory, and it's brought in, this machloket is brought in Shelot Utshuvot Machazeh Eliyahu from Pesach Eliyahu Falk, Alav Shalom, that there are those Rishonim who hold that not only when tefillin is on you, but even if you're holding the tefillin in your hand still, you cannot be mefiach. But that by itself is debatable. So maybe that machloket connects with this as well. But the Ben Ish Chai's understanding certainly is comparable, and therefore, when your hands are in the Sefer Torah, even if you're not wearing tefillin, even if it's not morning, it's Shabbat morning, or it's Shabbat afternoon, you know what I mean, and you're not wearing tefillin, still will be asur to be mefiach, so something to be mindful as well. And if a person can't control himself, take your hands off of Sefer Torah, of course. But that has a additional problem, just in parentheses. If there is reach ra, if there is bad odor created from this, a person cannot be saying any psukim or learning Torah, right? If you're the cause of it, you cannot be learning Torah, and you cannot be saying psukim. So that has to be, you have to bear in mind that halacha as well. Now, says the Mishnah Berura, we're continuing on this. As we mentioned, it's not just at the time of the bracha, but even when they're reading the Torah, you should be connected with the Torah. So as we mentioned, Berishchai says you hold your hands with the separation of the cloth on the actual parchment of the Torah. And according to Ashkenazim, it would be simpler to just hold the amudim, the poles of the Sefer Torah, the Taz and Bach hold, that should be continued during the course of the reading as well. Yesh nagin lechoz as biriot atzman. And here the Mishnah Berura says that those who, during the reading itself, they hold the actual yeriot, the actual parchment, ali de mapa, of course, through a cloth, v'ayim b'magen Avraham, and says the Mishnah Berura, achar hakriya minhag lenashek Sefer Torah. After the reading of the Sefer Torah, the minhag is to kiss the Sefer Torah. U'sheizdamelo rok yarok ach min hatzad. If a person has a saliva, he has he has to spit, then, of course, as the Shulchan Aruch discusses this in the halachot of Sefer Torah in Yoreh De'ah, in Siman Resh Pei Bet, there, the very beginning of the Siman, the Maran Shulchan Aruch there discusses that if you have a rock, you can spit it on the side without being facing the Sefer Torah. It should not be disrespectful. If you could have a handkerchief or a talit to take it in that way, that would be even better. But you don't want to kiss the Sefer Torah when you have mucus in your mouth. If you have a rock in your mouth, that's not respectful, of course. So therefore, you do what you need to do, and then you kiss this Sefer Torah. Now,
are you supposed to just hold the box? Like put our hand on the...
You could. Ben Ish Chai says best is to
touch the cloth.
Meaning touch the parchment with the cloth, with your talit. That's reasonable. The way that's practical and reasonable. Now, the again we mentioned that the Kaf HaChaim, Ben Ish Chai, they also go with this Bach and Taz that during the whole course of the reading should be touching the Sefer Torah, and they say should do it with the right hand, l'chatchila, and the should be during the entire reading, from the very beginning until the very end. Now, how do you hold the Sefer Torah with a cloth? So the Torah Lishma writes that you wrap the mapa, the cloth, around the parchment of the Sefer Torah, but it's asur to put your hand, you wrap your hand, and then take the Sefer Torah with it, because that's not derech kavod. It's like having a glove and holding. It's not derech kavod. You're not holding the Sefer Torah. You have to cover your hand to touch the Sefer Torah. You cover the Sefer Torah and then touch that. Not wrapping your hand with a cloth. Basically, imagine if you have a latex, glove, and you go to Sefer Torah. That's very disrespectful. Even though that you're not touching the Sefer Torah and you're doing it for that reason, but it looks like, I don't want to touch the Sefer Torah. It's my hands getting dirty. You cover your hand when you don't want something to touch your hand. you cover something when you don't want your hand to touch that thing. So the way would be derech kavod, writes the Ben Ish Chai in Torah Lishma, would be to put the cloth on the yiriyah, and then you touch it with. Now, if you're not wrapping anything, you just put the cloth that usually is covering the Sefer Torah when you say the brachot, just with that you touch the yiriyah, that's fine. You're not wrapping any of them, you're just putting a hefsek in between your hand and the Sefer Torah, and that is just fine. There's no problem with that. And again, any Sifrei Kodesh, it's not just the Sefer Torah. The L'chatchila Midat Chasidut is whenever you're learning any Sefer, you're learning Gemara, you're learning Chumash, you're learning Mishna Berura, after you're done, you kiss them. When you open them, you start learning, you kiss them. When you are done with learning, you kiss them, and that is also considered a Segula Lezikaron. It's considered a Segula for remembering the Torah, because when you respect the Torah, when you deal with it, there was a Rav in East Coast that he gives very elaborate shiurim, gaon, a tremendous chacham, and he uses many dozens of sfarim in any given shiur. He has a pile of sfarim that he brings in his shiurim, and it's beautiful to watch how he holds every sefer like a baby, kisses them, opens them, reads from them, kisses them back. You see tremendous display of kavod Torah, and that's again lechatchila. As the Kaf HaChaim writes over here, Kaf HaChaim says every sefer that you learn, you open it, you kiss it before you learn it, you close it, when you're done with it, you kiss it, you put it back. That is a display of Kavod Torah, and that basically concludes our Siman Kuf Lameted. Bezrat Hashem, we will be discussing Dinei Hefsek B'Birkat Torah, Siman Kuf Mem, in the days to come.